Nigeria's economy finds itself at a defining crossroad, with recent projections from the Central Bank of Nigeria suggesting growth approaching 4.5%, inflation easing towards the low teens, and a more stable foreign exchange environment. These numbers point to real progress recorded by ongoing reforms by the government. Amid ongoing economic recovery, the World Bank has projections for Nigeria's economic growth rate for 2026 to 4.4%, from the 3.7% forecasted in June 2025. What does this mean as we ease into 2026? Well, I have joining me as a fellowship doctorate at the Institute of Professional Economists and Policy Management, Abuja, Dr. Yusha'u Aliyu. Thank you very much for joining us at this time, Dr. Yusha'u.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year.
Same to you, of course. Now, Dr. Aliyu, from your perspective as a professional economist and policy expert now, how would you describe the current state of the Nigerian economy as we approach 2026?
We begin 2026 in a good note because prices remain stable and all macroeconomic aggregate are positive, especially gross GDP prospect. And at the same time also, we are starting there with a good policy adjustment as far as spending is concerned due to the recent adjustment of budgetary provisions of 2025 to 2026 and the promise made by the president to effect immediately. Notwithstanding also, we have started there with a relatively good supply of PMS. All these are good these are good indicators as far as supply and multiplier factor effect on general price level is concerned.
All right, so in all of this now, what's major global economic shift since 2023 do you think will have the greatest influence on Nigeria's economic trajectory in this year?
When you take global macroeconomic indices as postulated by different economic bodies, including the World Bank and other rating agencies, it shows that there is a little bit stability in general prices. That is one. Second, but the volatility of international trade policies is also a significant factor, especially when you look at the Trump tariffs that is going around and it is always multiplying. And also when you take the global oil supply, which is going to be disrupted by the annexation of Venezuela and some other component of crisis that is taking place in the Middle East, especially with the Iran disturbances, which definitely is going to affect output of crude oil and is also affect general prices and at the same time also affect global production and trade volumes.
All right, so let's talk about the ongoing global issues such as geopolitical tensions, energy transitions, and changing trade alliances. How does this affect economic prospects for developing economies like Nigeria?
It shows that if geopolitical economic zones are having a lot of disturbances, so the best option for emerging economies is to look at their economic priorities and also to take trade advantage. The simple parameters in taking any option with regard to trade option is that you look at the deficit you have within the economy, you look at the strength of the economy, and you also look at the weaknesses of the economy, and then you strike a balance. Emerging economies have a lot of options, either to continue to belong and listen to World Trade Organization and also adopt all the measures postulated by World Trade Organization, or to have a little shift to look into economic blocks like BRICS, which is very significant, especially when you look at the context of BRICS, where you have two biggest economies of the world, the India and China, which also have a lot of productive capacity and also has a lot of technology transfers advantages. These are things that can drive emerging economies, especially when you look at the low level of production, and also you look at low level of supply of essential goods, and also look at the challenges of international dispute that is ongoing, which relatively affect transport costs and indirectly affecting the end user cost, which also affect inflation. So the emerging economies have a lot of advantage to look at their priorities, and their priorities is always one, to look at how they can advance the energy consumption, the energy production and distribution, which is very significant for generating jobs, generating additional income, and also bringing GDP to a better sustainable parameter.
Okay, so let me, before I go further on the questions I have, let me take you on the issue that you just mentioned about emerging economies now. Do you think that Africa, the countries in the African continent have been described as emerging economies, do you think we should find our own homegrown solutions rather than taking solutions from the IMF and the likes and implementing it here?
When external economies are mentioned, we remember most of the African states are signatories to this. But that does not prevent Africa to come back to harness the potential of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which will now influence intra-trade, which will also put African nations in a big advantage. Remember, over 40% of medium, small enterprises in the entire Africa are based in Nigeria. And also when you look at the regional economic bloc ECOWAS, Nigeria is a significant denominator that translates a lot of economic gains. But when you take Africa on a broader scale, you will see that where you are deficient, another state is efficient. A good example is Nigeria is to lead Africa in PMS production because Nigeria has shown capacity of having the biggest refinery, having the biggest distribution network that will now assist other African states to have trade between them. If you take gas supplies also, you take Morocco, you take Algeria, and you take Nigeria. Energy, in fact, energy production and distribution is efficient within Africa if Africans can consider their market arrangement and market engagement within the continent. The same thing applies to technology transfer. South Africa is a very good case study. If you take technology, if you take advancement, yeah.
So I understand what you're saying, and I'm glad you have mentioned all of these parameters. But from what you have said, do we need external economies to drive development in Africa, especially Nigeria?
Of course, yes. Of course, yes. There is no way we exclude ourselves from the international economy. If you take the measures taken by Mr. President this week in Dubai, is inviting the United Arab Emirates to come for an investment summit in Lagos. So that attempt, these are the attempts that we must be doing to encourage investors to come to African soil, and after taking that advantage, other African states too have their own trade partners. These are the things the internal arrangement should be given much consideration. Call investors. When you call investors, they are coming with funds, they are coming with technology, and they are coming with experience. And when you put them together, it is an alternative to generate additional employment. And by generating employment, it is also a big opportunity for the African soil to dominate itself, and then at the same time also becoming an emerging economy that can penetrate other continents of the world as far as supply of goods and services is concerned. Taking good advantage of Dangote, for instance. Dangote is producing fertilizer. Dangote is having a market in Nigeria and also having market in Africa. But he has already discovered market in the United States. He has discovered additional market in Saudi Arabia. So there is no way under recent or contemporary global trade arrangement that Africa can be excluded. The only thing is that we have to discover our potentials and then invest more and call for investment too.
All right, so let's move further to interest rates now. What role will global monetary policies, especially interest rate decisions by major economies, play in shaping Nigeria's growth and inflation outlook for 2026?
It depends on what we are consuming.
Okay.
Determination of interest rate globally has to do with the trade volumes, the trade pattern, and also the trade commitment. But what is more important is that the apex bank within sub-African continent have to sit and agree on better potentials of interest rate, because it is one good thing to bring contractionary monetary policies which will reduce circulation of currencies and at the same time also give a negative impact to our GDP. But it is important to understand that all the monetary parameters that are being explained or that has been advocated by different economies, no economy there is no facing some monetary challenges in trying to advance the rate at which investors will invest in that economy and also to compete globally. Remember, the Chinese economy, which Africa largely depends on, was able to stabilize interest rate within the economy, and that is why most of the products that are coming out from the Chinese economy are coming at a lower rate compared to other production of other continents, and that is why Africa is taking that advantage. So, like I told you earlier, our own concentration should be to look into our potential, to look into our possibilities and prospects, and at the same time also adhere strictly to monetary policies that can build domestic economies so that they can compete relatively with other economies within the sub-economic region of Africa.
I like that you've put a caveat there in between why we should develop our own economy, look at international economies and try to implement what they have here. But do you think the IMF, the World Bank, the policies of the IMF and the World Bank have been fair to Nigeria especially and to Africa as a continent?
Right from inception, if we are to speak holistically, Africa does not, African economy supposed to depend on resources that are available within the continent. But unfortunately, these international monetary organizations have a lot of influence in redirecting how we consume and also how we invest. Unfortunately, some of these international organizations were responsible for even putting a lot of crisis in some economies at independence. But what is available today is that because of the potentials that exist in different international monetary organizations, be it from the Western Bloc or from the Eastern Bloc, or even probably from the Saudi Arabia, which are normally interest-based interventions. So there is no way we can shy away from them. The only thing is that we should define our priorities, define the concept of our engagement, and then make good use of our internally generated revenue to reduce our reliance on these foreign loans. Reliance is the most dangerous economic disaster that African nations always face, reliance on foreign intervention or in financial facilities. Let me be frank with you and to listeners. Without international financial market, the largest refinery today in Africa, in Nigeria, cannot be attended to. So how do you define? So it now depends on our attitude, which has always been advocated by developmental economists like W.W. Rostow, who always said that it is our attitude to consumption that will change. It is our attitude to investment that will change. It is our attitude to development. That is what is need to be changing to positive. And positive in statistics is always significant because you will see the result And when you test the hypothesis, at the end of the day, you begin to correlate and establish other economic parameters that may be significant for a traditional economy based on the potentials of that economy.
What economic parameters should we focus on to grow our economy in Nigeria?
First, to identify our human resource. And identifying our human resource, then we should know the potentials of our human resource. Then we look at our capital investment. All this, if it is identified, we have identified our priorities that no economy can grow without energy. Then what is the relative development? What is the relative investment in energy that requires us to have stable energy that can give us whatever transformation that we are looking in terms of our productive technique? This is important. The second aspect also is also to look at our specialization. Look at the state. Look at the special economic zones. Look at who are qualified to invest in different economic zones. There are economic zones that agriculture can thrive. There are economic zones that industrialization can thrive. So these are the things, if we can identify them, then we now bring a national policy. We have to bring national policy for us to continue to define which sector is important. But the 4 prime indices of development as advocated by United Nations, you look at education, you look at health, you look at manufacturing, and then you look in general terms to other sectors of the economy, which are very, very significant and which are also, if given right attention, can continue to grow the GDP. And by growing GDP, all the aspirations that the economy is looking for, especially now that we are looking at achieving a $1 trillion economy, we put banking capitalization, which is significant. We now also look at the rate at which liquidity can circulate. All these economic factors are very significant in determining how to build an economy, and then not only build it for economic sake, but you build it to prosperity. And that prosperity, not just prosperity of the economy, but prosperity that is going to be collective, meaning that government, individual, as well as investors.
Now, do you see the global economy moving towards recovery, a further uncertainty by 2026, and what does this mean for Africa?
The world economy is heading to recovery, because if you take micro studies of the larger economy, Nigeria is recovering. And when you see that your domestic economy is growing, other indicators on other economies within the sub-region are also growing. You look at the continent, all the sectors that are looking for right investment for recovery have given attention. So the global economy and the potential of global economy has to do with, like I said initially, the type of consumption, because consumption determines production, and production determines prosperity. All these things have to be looked into vigorously by different economies. And that's why we have different fora. From the West Africa, we have the ECOWAS. From the Africa, we have the African Economic Summit, which always shape the right investment and the right location for investment, and also the right potentials that are scattered within the continent, as well as the right resources, especially human resources, that is available, and how to develop them to compete with other geographical economic zones of the world.
Well, some experts are of the opinion that many of these economic summits that we attend are just talk shop and has no major impact on the economy of any nation.
No. You can look at it as talk show. Some are looking at this program as a talk show. But what we are trying to portray is that this is commitment. So whoever, at whatever level, there is need to dialogue, to sit, even for 2 minutes. In some places, you cannot start a meeting every day in a company that is growing until when you have a coffee time. You sit, you take your coffee and bring ideas. When you pick Economy grows with only one idea. And if you take it to practical sense, it takes you where you want to be. Most of the economies of the world, the Chinese, the Mao Zedong took China to where it is. The Japanese, the Japanese emperor took it to where it is. And at the same time also, some of the economies of Africa of today, like Rwandan economy, Paul Kagame has attended a lot of summit and understood why cooperation is important. But the best thing is that whatever you take, you study your environment, you study the policy, you look at your potentials, and then bring in the right people. That is where we are making mistakes. To make individual productive so that that productivity can sustain the growth of an industry is available. So all these summits, to me, they are important. Even if it is for 1 hour, they're important, and they are changing world. The entire economy the entire world economy, when Europe wanted to industrialize, they industrialized not just by going into the industry. They sat, they looked at the economic challenges, they looked at the tariff wars, they looked at the production option, they looked at the source of raw materials. They also look at where markets are located, and then it is from that tree that World Trade Organization was designed. It is within that tree consumption that the World Bank is built. It is the same from that fora that that we have even the United Nations. So it is important for us to look, to sit, to discuss, and then bring out options.
All right, so inflation has remained a major concern. What do you expect inflationary trends to look like by this year?
Inflation definitely is not going to be an easy task because there is going to be high liquidity in the economy. Like I said in one of the projections last year, after the tax reform, we are expecting, with the effect of this tax policy, we are expecting additional revenues. And these additional revenues pose a lot of challenge to inflationary trend and also force a lot of challenge to volatility of our exchange rate, except major check indices are used. That is, the anti-corruption agencies to check the CBN, to check the commercial bank, to check the Bureau de Change, and also to check other malpractices that may emerge. That is from the liquidity. From the monetary policy, we are still on a very tightening situation where we have 27% MPR, which is also very high and which also poses a lot of challenge to our to general price level. So, you know, when there are so much resources and the same resources goes to market at the same time, then definitely prices are likely to be changing. And these changes is going to be adverse to the economy by taking a lot of producers' profit, not only taking their profit, but it will force them to begin to reduce high number of employed citizens. Remember, the World Bank has postulated that over 141 million Nigerians are already below the poverty line, which is very serious and which is also very dangerous. And there is need for the policymakers to look at how to reduce this number so that we can increase our productive capacity, increase our consumption and purchasing powers, which will indirectly affect our GDP growth.
Okay, so if the current reforms are sustained, what realistic economic outcomes can Nigeria expect in this year?
Repeat the question.
I'm asking that if current reforms are sustained now, what realistic economic outcomes can Nigerians expect this year?
What we are going to expect is that first, we are expecting our purchasing power to be increasing. How? Because if by the exemptions of many items under the tax reform, we are expecting those things to be cheaper. But notwithstanding, what I want to advise is that government has to be proactive in distribution of resources, especially what we witnessed in 2025 should not be repeated. We are expecting critical infrastructures the ongoing project to go simultaneously with the releases of revenue, of resources, which will adversely generate additional labor, which will also give consumers an advantage in the market. Remember, any advantage consumer is gaining is also sending that signal to our productive capacity. And when we send that to our productive capacity, is directly pushing our GDP prospect. The GDP prospect, as advocated by Nigerian Outlook, is 4.6%. So if that can be achieved, then definitely a milestone is likely to be recorded. But however, the general price level, I want to take this advantage to explain that one factor that remains significant is that very soon our farmers are going to farm, and we are expecting input variables, cost of input variables to begin to decline. Government knows the option to bring prices of fertilizer, to bring prices of insecticide, which can help our farmers to go back to production so that we can have enough food for our food security.
All right. Fellowship Doctorate at Institute of Professional Economist and Policy Management, Abuja, Dr. Yusha'u Aliyu. Thank you very much for sharing your perspectives on the economy. Thank you so much.